Welcome to the first episode of Paige and Micah in the PM, where we sit down and talk about the reason for the season, football. I'm Paige Hunter.
And I'm Micah Farmer.
And we are so excited to kick off this new show. We will be talking all things football, bringing you analysis, news, and takes on what's happening in both college and the pros. Let's dive right into it by touching on some of the major games from this week of college football. Starting with the top-ranked Georgia Bulldogs. The reigning champs traveled to the Plains to take on the Auburn Tigers and ended up having their hands full in the Deep South's oldest rivalry, escaping with a close 27-20 victory.
Yeah, this game was a lot closer than I think people expected it to be. Georgia came in and Auburn was ready for them. A lot of people thought this was going to be a blowout after Auburn kind of failed to show up in College Station versus Texas A&M, but the Auburn defense was ready, the Auburn running game was ready, and it ended up being a pretty close game.
Very close. I think all of us here at Auburn didn't expect to be, tied and leading the #1 team in the nation. Definitely a great game. Great game to be Auburn Tiger. Outcome was not what we wanted, but overall performance just really great.
You saw the game start and you're thinking, okay, this is another one of Georgia's slow starts. But the slow start continued all the way into the fourth quarter, and then Auburn kind of forgot to cover Brock Bowers, and that ended up being the undoing for the Tigers as they lost 27-20.
That is correct. But through that, the Auburn defense, pressure, pass rush, really showed out. And a defense that's kind of struggled this season a little bit. Jalen Simpson getting his 4th interception of the season already.
In week
5. And that was a very pivotal moment in the game. Really just a lot of energy from the Tigers in that game. Very excited for week 6, against LSU. See how it could go.
Yeah. I would not want to play LSU right now off the back of their loss to Ole Miss. And thankfully, we don't have to, because that's what bye weeks are for.
True. Next up, the 11th ranked Fighting Irish of Notre Dame headed to Durham, North Carolina in primetime to face the number 17 Duke Blue Devils, leading with a 21-14 win.
Another close game this weekend, just a really strong defensive game between these two teams. It kind of reminded me of when Notre Dame played Ohio State, the same feel game to that. Then just in the fourth quarter, Sam Hartman being able to lead Notre Dame to a score, and you're like, okay, is Duke going to be able to come back and finish this off? And then Riley Leonard with what looked like an awful injury, but turns out to not be season ending, so that's good for Duke. But overall, just a physical football game, very entertaining football game, and I'm curious to see where Notre Dame can go from here.
I am too. With the upcoming game against Louisville, the Irish have a lot to bounce back from. Following the loss to Ohio State, they're a little nervous coming into this past week's matchup against Duke, especially with it being away. Let's talk about that Duke defense for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Number 4 in scoring overall, number 19 in total defense. Just a lot of pressure. They denied Sam Hartman from finding the end zone via air for the first time this whole season.
Yeah, I think Duke's defense all year had been good. People are saying, okay, maybe a lackluster Clemson offense this year, then you're not really playing a lot of other big teams. Let's see what you do when you face Sam Hartman and this Irish offense. And what they did, like you said, they kept him from finding the end zone all game, which was just very impressive to me. And I think despite the loss, this Duke team emerged from this game with more respect from the national media than they entered it with.
I agree. Moving on from the ACC, let's go to the SEC. In the week's other primetime matchup, the 13th ranked Bayou Bengals of LSU traveled to Oxford to take on number 20 Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss Rebels. The defense proved to be optional in this one, with Ole Miss winning the shootout 55-49.
Yeah, I think what you see in this game is more just disappointment from LSU. They came in so highly ranked to start the year, and Jaden Daniels and that offense, and well, it's hard to win games when you don't have a defense, and that's now bitten LSU twice this season in Florida State and now versus Ole Miss, and you think, the season is already so disappointing. Will LSU be able to rebound? I'm not sure. Just a lot of doubts about this LSU team right now.
I think week 6 and the upcoming weeks are really going to have to be big for the Tigers to prove, their dominance in the SEC and that they, deserve to be a top team and a playoff contending team potentially. Both very big offensive teams, but I just think overall this win was good bounce back for Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, and just to kind of prove, that they are a name in the SEC and a team that people should be watching out for.
Yeah, you've seen them spiral a lot after losses like they had to Alabama last week under Lane Kiffin, but it's good to see them be able to actually regroup and beat a ranked team the next week for once. So I think despite the loss to Alabama, this is a bit different Ole Miss team than we're used to seeing over the last couple years.
I agree. Now moving on to the West Coast, number 10 Utah traveled to Corvallis to take on number 19 Oregon State under the Friday night lights. The Beavers were able to protect their home turf, securing a convincing 21-7 victory.
Yeah, this just felt like an old-fashioned Big Ten West game. The problem was it was a Pac-12 game. It's a bit surprising. I think you're seeing the loss of Cam Rising is hurting that Utah offense a lot. Hopefully he's able to come back soon for the Utes, or else their season might be dead in the water if they keep dropping games like this. That's not to discredit Oregon State, though. Jonathan Smith has them playing very physical football. Clemson transfer DJ Uiagalelei is not maybe the optimal quarterback, but he's doing well enough to get that team led by their rushing attack to some wins, and I think Oregon State could be a sleeper in the Pac-12 this season.
I agree. With the unraveling Pac-12, everyone's kind of interested to see how the season's going to play out for them. But from what we've seen, Oregon State is a very physical team, and Utah definitely needs Cam Rising back as soon as possible. Yesterday. Over in the Lone Star State, number 24 Kansas traveled to Austin to take on the third-ranked Texas Longhorns. Texas left no doubt in this one, pummeling the Jayhawks 40-14.
Yeah, this game you're like, okay, maybe Jalen Daniels is going to keep this close for the Jayhawks, and then before the game, Jalen Daniels ruled out due to injury, and then immediately you're thinking, oh no, this could go very bad for Kansas, and indeed it did.
Yes.
Quinn Ewers in that offense is humming right now. I think Texas is going to be a very hard team to stop if they keep playing like this, especially the defense. You don't think defense under Steve Sarkisian, but this Texas defense has been really good now through many games this season, and I think they might be here to stay.
I agree. You know, every year the question is Texas back? But I think this year is the year that Texas fans can officially say they are back. Quinn Ewers is continuing to make a statement. This past weekend threw for 25 for 35, 325 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, but that's not to discredit the total yardage that the Longhorns put up, which was 661 yards.
Yeah. You wonder, coming into the season, losing a talent like Bijan Robinson and then Roschon Johnson as well, what is the running game going to do? But they have stepped up, and the Texas running game is firing as well. It's not just Quinn Ewers through the air.
Texas offense is continuing to prove that they deserve to be, mentioned and recognized up there with some of the other powerhouses. And finally, in a high noon duel in the Pac-12, number 8 USC traveled to Boulder to take on Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes. USC stormed out ahead early, but Colorado made this one a close one. In the game, the end, just falling short by a score of 48-41.
Yeah, I think you look at this game, and the start of the game, USC storms out quickly, and you're thinking, not again, not Colorado getting pummeled on national television again. But then Shadur Sanders started to lead this Buffs team back, and I think when you look at this game, you see more concern about that USC defense. You hear all the talk about Caleb Williams, who was great, going 30 for 40 with 403, 6 touchdowns and an interception. But if the defense is going to give up 40-plus to this Colorado team, what is that defense going to do versus Washington? What is that defense going to do versus Oregon? So I think despite good fight from Colorado, you got to be concerned about the Southern Cal defense moving forward.
Yes, and I don't know about you, Micah, but I'm loving all this action in the Pac-12. I feel like the Pac-12 is a conference that in the past we haven't heard a lot from, but just continuing to show that, while this might be their final year as a conference, that, they're going out with a bang. Same with Colorado, big bounce back from last week's huge blowout loss, but they ended up outscoring USC in total yards, which is, not something you get out of a team that loses. Very close game, a good one to watch.
It was, yeah. I think this early window might have been a bit weak coming into the weekend, but it did not disappoint with that game.
I agree. Another big question circling right now is, will Caleb Williams repeat for Heisman?
I don't know. I think that's something we're going to have to talk about a little bit later.
All right, when we come back, it's time to enter the Conference Center, where we take you around the college football landscape, one conference at a time. Welcome back to Paige and Micah in the PM, and welcome to the Conference Center, where we take you all around the current landscape of college football, one conference at a time. Let's begin on the West Coast with the Pac-12. The Pac-12 might be disappearing soon, but they aren't going out quietly. With 6 ranked teams and some of the best quarterback play in the nation, Micah, who stands out to you most right now in the Pac-12?
Well, I think you got to start with Washington and Michael Penix. That receiver trio they have of Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk is outstanding. They're averaging 60 more passing yards per game than the next closest team, and that's just frankly a ridiculous stat. Michael Penix right now is my front runner for Heisman, and I think because of that, you have to regard this Washington team as a major threat. Although Oregon in the Pac-12 is another team that I would look out for. They have almost the same level of total offense as Washington does, and yet their defense has been much more impressive in my opinion. They've held opponents to almost no points. I looked at what they did versus Colorado, who just put up 41 on USC. They held them under 10. So I think this Oregon-Washington game coming up in 2 weeks is going to decide the fate of the Pac-12. And to me, the third team in that top tier is Southern Cal, despite not really having a defense. That offense led by Caleb Williams, I think, is enough to still put them in the top tier of the Pac-12, in my opinion. And so those are my three teams currently that I would watch out for as far as winning the Pac-12 title.
Yeah, can't argue with those offensive stats, total yardage. I mean, the Pac-12 is here to stay for now.
Yeah. Then I think if you keep looking at the Pac-12, you have more interesting teams like Washington State. Cameron Ward is leading that team to places that not many people thought they would be right now. They're ranked number 13, and obviously were not ranked to start the year. And this passing offense, you know how I said Washington was 60 yards ahead of the next best team? Mm-hmm. That next best team is Washington State. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to look at this team and say, if they play a team like Southern Cal and you get into an offensive shootout, even though Caleb Williams is amazing, Washington State might hang around and make that a game. So I think them, along with Oregon State. Oregon State is just a complete wild card right now to me in this conference. Physical football, not really a high-flying offense like your others, but they're going to drag you into their type of a football game, like first to 25 wins, and you're going to be stuck slogging it through there rather than slinging the rock around like you're used to. So I think you also have to watch out for Oregon State, especially when teams have to travel to Corvallis later this season. Now, let's move into the area of the conference center that just means more, the SEC. Despite it meaning more, the SEC has been down slightly this year with teams such as Alabama, LSU, and Tennessee underperforming out of the gates. Paige, what would your main takeaway from this year of SEC football be so far?
So I have to agree with you on that. The SEC just doesn't feel as dominant as it normally does. There's lots of shakeup going around with your normal powerhouses such as Alabama and Georgia. Bama, as we've seen this year, underperforming just slightly, not the Alabama we're used to seeing. And, with Georgia coming into Auburn last weekend, the outcome of that game just not expected. So definitely lots of shaking up to the normal powerhouses. You have all your new power teams, in my opinion, such as Ole Miss and A&M. Definitely, names and teams that are saying like, hey, we're here. This isn't the Alabama-Georgia conference, Tennessee conference, LSU conference. Like, this is the SEC. And, you have the addition of Texas and Oklahoma coming soon. I think the SEC is expecting a lot of shakeup this season and as well as next.
I think one interesting thing with the SEC this year, you talk about maybe the top powers not being as strong as usual. And like you said, what you ended up with is a really competitive SEC West, especially this year, with Ole Miss, LSU, and Alabama. And what's interesting is, if Ole Miss wins out in conference, Alabama wins out in conference other than LSU, and LSU beats Alabama and wins out in conference, what you end up with is a three-way tie for the SEC West with LSU, Alabama, and Ole Miss, with all three of those teams being 1-1 versus the other two, which is just absolutely chaotic and not something we're used to seeing from the usual cut and dry SEC West of let's just send Alabama to Atlanta before the season starts. So that's been really fun to watch this year. Then in the East, teams like Tennessee, South Carolina, especially South Carolina. South Carolina came in with so much hype to the start of this season. Spencer Rattler, everyone's like, oh, Spencer Rattler, dark horse for the Heisman. And he's been great, but they have no offensive line, no defensive line. The South Carolina team is just not what they were expected to be. And as a result, you have a team like Kentucky, a team like Missouri fighting for that second place spot in the East and maybe even the first place spot if one of them can upset Georgia. So I think it's been a lot more topsy-turvy of an SEC than than we expected. I think that's great for football, to be honest.
I agree. Definitely, the SEC is not what kind of everyone expected this year, not the norm, which is great. You know, you love seeing these new teams being introduced and these new teams getting the recognition and the hype that they deserve. And I don't know about you, but I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's been great. Now over to the Big Ten, where 2 of the current top 4 teams reside. This Big Ten East is as tight as ever, with Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State all fighting to win. Which of these 3 teams do you think makes it to Indianapolis later this season, and do you think any team from the West could pull the upset in the championship game?
So, definitely agree with Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State powerhouse. You know, we just talked about the SEC being so big. Is that the Big Ten, you know, taking the top, you know,
could be this year
powerhouse spot? We'll have to see. For me personally, I think that in Indianapolis, you're going to end up seeing Michigan, and you're going to end up seeing them coming out and winning the Big Ten, and ultimately, you know, getting that spot secured in the college football playoffs. We'll talk about it more later, but Michigan's offense and defense is just flying right now. They're very solid. They work together very well, and just you're seeing a lot out of this Michigan team. You know, I feel like they should be getting, you know, more recognition than they are right now.
Yeah, I agree with you on Michigan. I have some doubts about the Ohio State offense currently, led by Kyle McCord. And as good as Penn State has looked, I want to see them play some other Big Ten East top competition. I know they went and they absolutely shut out Iowa, beat Iowa, but that was the Penn State whiteout game, and then Iowa still I don't really think has an offense. So because of that, I really don't think there's a Big Ten West team that can compete for the Big Ten title this year, but I do think your champion is going to come from one of those Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State later this season.
Let's talk a little bit about Ohio State. How are you feeling about this team this year?
I know there's a lot of hype around this Ohio State offense, especially with Marvin Harrison Jr. Oh, he's a top 3 pick in the draft, which I agree with. But the issue is he's not the one throwing the football. Kyle McCord is. And McCord did enough to win the Notre Dame game, but I think that game was so close, so low scoring. Later in playoff time, when you get to play some of these teams like maybe a Washington or a Texas, I'm not sure that this Ohio State offense can keep up with that. And frankly, within conference, I don't know if they can keep up with Penn State or Michigan right now. So I want to see Kyle McCord take a big step, or else I think Ohio State could be the 3rd best team in their own division right now.
I agree. Just something about this Ohio State team just doesn't sit right with me, especially after watching that Notre Dame game. You wonder how they're going to perform if they, you know, play Michigan, play Penn State. Pass yards are insane right now coming out of Ohio State, but I mean, you just feel they can do better overall on both sides of the ball. Moving on to the ACC, it looks like the road to title will run through Florida State this season. Duke looked to be the Seminoles' closest competition, but will be without Riley Leonard for some time. However, Leonard will reportedly be available to return sometime later in this year. With that being said, can anyone challenge FSU in the ACC, or will the Seminoles have an easy road to the playoff?
Well, I think with Leonard out now, your biggest hurdle has already been taken care of, and winning at Death Valley and taking care of Clemson. Because now, if Duke can survive their conference schedule, missing Leonard for a few weeks, you're just going to rematch with Duke in the title game again. Because the Notre Dame loss does not affect your ACC standing for Duke. And then Clemson, already having 2 conference losses, they're going to need some help, especially since the losses are Duke and Florida State. Mm-hmm. They're going to need Duke or Florida State to lose more than 2 games, since Clemson doesn't own either of those tiebreakers. And I think because of that, I don't think this Duke offense, despite the defense being amazing, I don't think the Duke offense, even with Leonard, is dynamic enough to match up with Florida State. And I think other teams in the ACC, such as Miami or Louisville, who right now look good record-wise, I don't think they have that staying power to really even make the conference title game. I think your one hurdle to Florida State, if North Carolina can make the conference title game, I think Drake May is the one QB in the conference who can go toe-to-toe and even outplay Jordan Travis. So I think if North Carolina shows up against Florida State, that'll be one to worry about. But other than that, Florida State should have this ACC wrapped up, barring any catastrophe.
I agree. Now over to the Big 12, a conference currently led by 2 teams that will be leaving it soon, Texas and Oklahoma. The 2 will meet this week in the Red River rivalry game in Dallas, setting up a matchup many think could be a preview for the rematch in the conference title game later this season. Do you agree, or do you think there is a sleeper somewhere in this conference?
Well, I think if Jalen Daniels can come back for Kansas, and Kansas can beat Oklahoma, and Kansas can get another shot at Texas on a neutral field with their starting quarterback, I think that's the only way one of these two teams does not walk away with the conference title this year. Texas's offense, and Oklahoma's as well for that matter. Dylan Gabriel this season for Oklahoma has been on fire, and they've been going crazy. People last year saying, oh, Brent Venables isn't going to succeed at Oklahoma. I think he's succeeding a lot right now personally. And so I do think that this Red River rivalry game, it's a preview for the Big 12 title game, and I do think the winner of that will not only win the Big 12, but end up in the playoffs later at the end.
And finally, let's give some love to the little guys. Are there any teams outside the Power 5 that are standing out to you at this point in the season?
Yeah, they're a good bit of undefeated group of 5 teams at this point, and I think that story starts with number 24, Fresno State, who is currently 5-0. Their offense, led by Jay Kaner, has been great this season. You saw Jay Kaner a little bit last season in the UCLA game, and the fight he had in that game to finish on a hurt ankle and win that game for the Bulldogs. I think that shows the kind of heart this Fresno State team has. And within their own conference, Air Force's defense has been absolutely suffocating this season. Their run game, you know, those military academies, they love to run the ball down your throat, and Air Force has been doing that all this season. So I think the Mountain West champion will have a good shot to represent the group of 5 in the New Year's Six this year. But if it's not one of them, I think you need to keep an eye on James Madison. The Dukes are 5-0 in the Sun Belt right now and would have had a decent shot of making a New Year's Six bowl game last year if it weren't for the rule that your first year in the FBS, you're not allowed to play in a bowl game. I don't understand why that exists personally. If they're good enough, let them in. But I think this could be the year for the Dukes. There isn't a lot of competition in the Sun Belt this year, so I think those are your 3 teams in the group of 5 to watch out for right now. With that said, the question it all comes back to is always the same. Who is at the top of college football right now? To answer that, let's transition into 4 to Score, the segment of the show in which Paige and I each share our current 4 playoff teams as well as 2 teams who are currently just on the outside looking in. So Paige, who is in your 4 to Score this week?
So, currently sitting at number 1, I have, as we talked about earlier, Michigan. I think they have a strong offense and defense. They've had lots of convincing wins so far. Their defense, coming back to it, is scary good. Ranked 4th in the nation right now. Their schedule is only going to get harder as the season progresses. You know, you have your Ohio State game coming up, but I think, you know, that game could end up again being another, you know, Michigan winning for the 3rd year in a row. And I think that they, as of right now, deserve to be the number 1 team. Coming at number 2, I have Georgia. I think that they were definitely overhyped a little bit coming to the season after last week's performance at Auburn showed that they might not be the powerhouse that we all thought they were. I still think they'll win the SEC. You know, Carson Beck's 72% completion as of right now, very good. Combine him with Brock Bowers. I mean, you talked about it earlier, dynamic duo. But Georgia, I don't think deserves to be the number 1 team right now. Coming in number 3, I have Texas, led by Quinn Ewers and his arm. He's currently sitting at 1,358 passing yards. And Texas overall is close to 1,000 rushing yards as a team and at almost 1,500 receiving yards. We talked about their offense. I mean, you can't argue with the stats. They're on fire right now. Along with the offense, the defense coming in strong too with 280 tackles. Strong pressure defense. I mean, Texas is doing good right now. And then my number 4 team is Washington. The Pac-12 finally gets its playoff team after a few years. Number 1 total offense right now. We talked about Penix and his arm and his yards. I mean,
lefty as well, just for fun.
Look at those stats. Defense, we talked about earlier too, is thriving right now. I think this is just a very good year for this Washington team. My first 2 out are going to be Ohio State and Florida State. We talked about it earlier. This Ohio State team is not just sitting well with me. The overall feeling for them is just mid. They have an insane air game. They're at almost 1,200 receiving yards and 600 rushing yards, give or take, which is pretty good, but I mean, they can do better. Their defense is currently carrying right now. They're staying at number 6 overall, but just, I think, ending up losing to Michigan, you're not going to be a playoff team this year. And same with Florida State. They're They really came in with a lot of hype, but their wins are not as convincing anymore. Jordan Travis does have an arm and is leading this team, but they really struggle with running the ball, and I think need to improve that in order to be a top 4 playoff team.
Yeah. For me, my number 1 is obviously the Rainbow Wars of Hawaii. I'm just kidding, what am I talking about? It's obviously going to be Michigan for me as well. They've beaten everyone on their schedule convincingly. That run game is just tenacious with Blake Corum. And then J.J. McCarthy has taken a step forward too. The passing game looks great. The defense is suffocating. This offensive line is as powerful as ever. I just don't think there's a team in the nation better than Michigan right now. Then at number 2, I have, as you said, the arm of Quinn Ewers and the rest of the Texas football team. The receiving core is nothing to sneeze at, though, either. Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell are both fantastic. Xavier Worthy is everyone's best friend down the field as a deep threat. And I think this Texas offense, when you combine it with the defense, it's actually getting pressure this year, is very formidable. Then at number 3, I have the Washington Huskies. Best offense in the nation. It's that simple. As you said, Michael Penix, the just lefty standout right now, and then his receiving core with Odunze McMillan and then Polk. It's just amazing. The passing offense, we've already just talked about it. We've beaten that point into the ground at this point. The only reason I would have them behind Texas is a bit weaker of a defense. They've given up more points to some worse teams, and so for me, that keeps them back at 3. And then at number 4, I'm going to have the Florida State Seminoles. Signature wins on the season, although, as you said, those are looking less impressive as the season moves on. Although this dynamic offense with Jordan Travis, Keon Coleman, and Johnny Wilson and Jaheim Bell, I think you have to regard that as one of the best offenses in the nation. They have one of the best edge prospects in the nation in Jared Verse, who despite lower sack production has still been really good this year, just a freak athlete off the edge, super twitchy, super crazy fast. And so for me, because of that defensive talent, I'm going to keep Florida State in my top 4. And then my first 2 out are going to be Ohio State and then Georgia. As I said earlier, I'm still unsure about Kyle McCord for the Buckeyes. I want to see him play a really good opponent that also has a good offense and see if he can keep up in that type of a game before I'm willing to slot them into my top 4. And then Georgia, to me, is just a weird team. They don't feel like they're beating people convincingly if you watch the games. And then you go back and look at the stats, and you're like, oh, well, they outgained them by 200 yards, and they won by 30, other than the Auburn game where it was close. So I don't know about this team. They just feel a bit lackluster to me every week. The front 7 is good, but the secondary isn't what it used to be. I'm not sure how much I can trust Carson Beck versus another top team, because if you play a team like Texas or Michigan or Washington, are you taking Carson Beck over J.J. McCarthy, Quinn Ewers, or Michael Penix?
Definitely not.
I don't think so. And so, also, this team goes so heavily in the way of Brock Bowers that I think if you find a team that can lock up Bowers and keep him even just under 100 yards, this offense might stand to fall apart. So for me, I have Georgia kept outside of the top 4.
So those are our current college football playoff picks. We'll have to check back at the end of the season to see, how close we were. So now it's time for college football Pick 5, where we pick 5 games for the upcoming week, one from each Power 5 conference. First up, we have the number 23 LSU Tigers traveling to Columbia to take on the number 21 Missouri Tigers. Micah, do you think Mizzou can stay undefeated, or do you think this is where the Bayou Bengals bounce back?
I do think Missouri stays undefeated, and I'll tell you why. Brady Cook. Brady Cook currently owns the longest ever SEC streak without throwing an interception of 348 pass attempts. And then his number 1 receiver, Luther Burden III. This dude is going to win the Biletnikoff this year, I think. He's been absolutely insane. He's averaging over 100 yards every game. He already has 5 touchdowns on the season. And I think this Missouri offense can more than keep up with the LSU offense. And I actually think this Missouri defense is a little better than the LSU defense. So because of that, I'm taking Missouri to protect home turf and move to 6-0 for the first time since 2013.
While it is at home, I do think this is where LSU bounces back. A lot's been riding on them these past couple of weeks. You're just coming off a loss to Ole Miss. But, I think ultimately the Tigers are going to go to Missouri and come back home with a win. Moving on to the Big 12, it's Red River Rivalry Week. Number 3 Texas and number 12 Oklahoma will meet in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, Texas, after getting blown out by the Longhorns 49-0 last season. Do you think that the Sooners can get their revenge?
No. This Texas offense is just too good. I think Oklahoma's offense is also good, but when you look at these two defenses, I trust the Texas defense much more than I trust the Oklahoma defense at this point. I think Quinn Ewers will be able to absolutely carve the Sooners up, and while I don't think it'll be 49-0 again, I think Texas definitely wins this game.
I agree with you. It's going to be a lot closer than last year, but I mean, can't argue with Quinn Ewers in his arm, and you can't argue with the Longhorns offense. Now over to the ACC, where number 25 Louisville will play host to the 10th ranked Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Can the undefeated Cardinals keep it going, or will the Irish be too much to handle?
I think the Irish will be too much for Louisville to handle in this one. I think Sam Hartman just has that mojo about him. You know, he's a guy that's going to win you games, and this Louisville team, their wins on the season, despite being 5-0, are not really impressive. I think they've benefited from an easy early schedule, and I think Notre Dame is going to be able to go there and take care of business fairly easily.
I agree, and you know, we saw after the performance versus Ohio State and then last week's performance at Duke, I mean, the Irish are bouncing back, and you know, Audric Esme being the #1 rushing leader currently right now, Sam Hartman is in Heisman contention. I mean, don't count these Irish out of the playoffs just yet. In the Big Ten, undefeated yet unranked Maryland will travel to Columbus to take on the #4 Ohio State Buckeyes. Can Maryland keep the momentum going, or is this where the Terps' undefeated season ends?
Well, you know what they say, September Maryland is usually one of the best teams of all time. The problem is, it's now October. Talia Tagovailoa is great. Maryland has a dynamic offense, but Maryland's defense is, frankly, I don't trust it at all versus Ohio State. I don't think they have the corners to be able to cover Marvin Harrison or Emeka Egbuka, so I think that Ohio State takes care of business at home fairly easily in this one.
I'm going to have to agree with you on that one, especially with it being at Ohio State too. I mean, it's October now. It's getting chillier up in the Midwest. And I just, you know, I think the Buckeyes now have to prove that, you know, this is where they start more conference play, and this is where that they, you know, really start to shine and become the playoff team that they think they deserve to be.
I think if they want to keep their reputation as well as a top team, they cannot afford to come out slow in this one versus Maryland.
I agree. And finishing up on the West Coast, number 13 Washington State will go down to sunny Los Angeles to take on UCLA. Will the Cougars and Cam Ward keep their dynamic offense humming, or do the Bruins make this a classic Pac-12 trap game?
I think that Cameron Ward will be more than enough to bring Washington State past the Bruins this week. I think this could be a fairly lower scoring affair than people expect, and that's because UCLA is not going to score very much. I think Washington State wins this handily. I think it is not close at all, and I think Cameron Ward starts to edge himself maybe into that Heisman discussion if Washington State can keep it going down their schedule.
There's been lots of Heisman discussion after this past weekend. I don't know about you, but I'm very excited to see how our top quarterbacks play this season, or play this week. A big Saturday ahead for college football indeed. After the break, however, we will jump into the pros and discuss all that's happened across the NFL this past week. Stay with us right here on Paige and Micah in the PM.
Welcome back to Paige and Micah in the PM. This past week in the NFL was as unpredictable as ever, so let's start it off with the constants of the league, our undefeated teams. The Eagles moved to 4-0 with a close win over the Commanders, and the 49ers did likewise with a win over division rival Arizona. Paige, which of these two teams do you think remains undefeated the furthest into this season?
While both these teams have really started to show out as we're getting more into the season, I think the 49ers are going to end up being the remaining undefeated team. Christian McCaffrey is showing off right now and running the ball. He's currently at 495 yards. Brock Purdy is putting up 72% completion rate, which is not bad. Also talking about not bad, that defense.
Yeah, that defense is so good.
So good. They've had lots of convincing wins. Their schedule is going to get tougher, but I mean, I think the 49ers can pull away with remaining undefeated for the rest of the season.
Yeah, personally, I'm going to agree with you on that. I think even you're starting to look at it, because no quarterback has really stood out to start this season, and what I think you're left with is maybe MVP CMC this year for the 49ers. He has been just on another level. I have a buddy who has him in fantasy, and it's absolutely ruining my day every time, but he's been outstanding this season. People were saying that trade wasn't going to pay off, and I think it has and more for the 49ers at this point.
I agree. Now let's move around the rest of the NFL, starting with the AFC East. This past week saw the red-hot Dolphins travel to Orchard Park to take on the Buffalo Bills. The Bills were able to cool the Miami offense, though, winning in a convincing fashion, 48-20. What do you think this game can tell us about these two teams moving forward?
I have absolutely no idea. These two teams have both been so confusing to watch this season. The Bills dropping week 1 to the Jets, who lost Aaron Rodgers after like 4 plays. Then the Dolphins, who put up 70 one week, then go and lose convincingly to the Bills. Although I would say, I think you did find out, the Bills' offense is back this season. Week 1, I think, was just a mirage. Week 1 jitter, stuff like that. Josh Allen looks on it right now. I think the Bills are going to go pretty deep this season, and that defense looks really good. Although losing Tre'Davious White with a torn ACL for the year is very tough for them, I think the defense is still going to be really good. As for the Dolphins, I think that offense is also something to watch out for despite having a down week. I think they're going to continue to make waves going forward. If Tua can stay healthy, the Dolphins offense hinges on Tua, and I think if Tua can't stay healthy, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. But right now, I still have confidence in both of these teams to make the postseason comfortably.
I do too, but we do have to give credit to our boy Josh Allen. He's really starting to find his rhythm, which is really paying off for this Bills team. And, don't count the Bills out just yet. Now over to the AFC North, where it's plain to see that there is trouble in Cincinnati. Joe Burrow and the offense have looked stagnant at best to start the season, and Cincinnati currently sits at 1-3 and last in the division. Meanwhile, the Ravens sit atop the division at 3-1. Can the Bengals rebound, or is this division to Baltimore's loss?
I think that at this point, the Bengals might be about done for. Starting 1-3 is very hard to recover from. Joe Burrow just does not look right at all. This calf injury is either much more serious and it's being let on, or he has completely forgotten how to play football. He looks terrible so far this season. The offense is only averaging 11.5 points per game, and you can't win games doing that, especially when your defense is allowing like 23 points per game. So, to me, I would say, is this a team that could potentially trade someone mid-season and just try to kind of reset for next year? And when you talk about that, I think you instantly looked at T. Higgins. T. Higgins is in a contract year this year, and there have reportedly been some struggles about that deal getting done, so I think it's very possible you see Higgins moved at the mid-season mark to try to set the Bengals up later if they consider this season lost.
Yeah, and you just have to look at the Joe Burrow effect. You talked about his calf injury. Is it more serious than the Bengals are leading on to, or is just, Burrow being healthy and effective the backbone of this offense?
I think one thing you have to look at, too, the offensive line is still garbage. As much as they've tried to fix it, it is so bad. It might be one of the worst in football. And I think you're going to need to protect Burrow so he doesn't keep getting injured like this. Granted, the calf was a non-contact thing in practice, but I still think you're going to have to figure out some way to protect Burrow better, or else you're going to see more of this moving forward.
I agree.
Now, let's travel on down to the AFC South, where all 4 teams are tied at 2-2. Furthermore, this division has been showcasing some pleasantly surprising play from some young QBs such as C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson. Who do you think ends up winning this division, and which QB in the division has impressed you the most so far this year?
I'm definitely going to have to go with C.J. Stroud and the Texans. He is, like you said, looking very, very good early. His completion could be a little higher than normal, but let's just look at his stats. 906 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Pretty good for him being such a young quarterback, new to this league and not, as experienced as some of our other quarterbacks playing. But that's not to discredit Anthony Richardson, who is flourishing over at the Colts. He's only played 2.5 games due to a concussion in week 2, but, he's just still doing very good, and the Colts are just really showing out. Over to the Jags, Trevor Lawrence has been a little disappointing, coming off such a powerful and influential career at Clemson. We really expected, I feel like, a lot out of him in the NFL.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
We're just not really getting that right now. About 65% completion, but only throwing for 736 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. This isn't the Trevor Lawrence that we used to see.
No, it really isn't. I think one thing you have to look at for Lawrence, though, is, like we talked about for Burrow, the lack of a true offensive line at this point. And then you also wonder, how good are his weapons? Calvin Ridley was great in week 1, but has been kind of lackluster since then. Christian Kirk has always really been a number 2 receiver, but you're wondering how much can you really get out of him? Is Evan Ingram going to continue to regress after a career year last year? And so I think you have to kind of feel for Trevor Lawrence a little bit in this situation, maybe not being really set up to succeed as much as even C.J. Stroud on the Texans is right now, which is crazy to say, but Nico Collins and Tank Dell have both been so good for Stroud. Collins has 15 catches for 260 and a touchdown in the year, and then Tank Dell has 15 for 251 and 2 touchdowns. So I think the young weapons for C.J. Stroud have really made the difference. And then, like you said, with Richardson flourishing in Indianapolis, and I think a lot of that is to do with Shane Steichen, who they brought in to be the head coach. Steichen was the offensive coordinator for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles last year, and I think you're seeing his knowledge of how to work with a mobile quarterback really help out Richardson when many considered him to be a very raw prospect. And we can't forget about the Titans, who also exist.
And now to the AFC West, where the story begins and ends, as always, it seems to recently, with the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City won a hard-fought game on Sunday night against the New York Jets in New York, but something just feels off about this Chiefs team as they currently sit at 3-1. Do you think Kansas City still wins the West this season, or will another team have anything to say about it?
Well, let's go through the list of AFC West teams right quick. Broncos, no.
No.
Raiders,
No.
no. Chargers, Brandon Staley is still there, and so for that reason, I think no. You lost Mike Williams for the rest of the season with a torn ACL. Justin Herbert's now banged up with a hand injury. If the Chargers were ever able to get out of their own way, I think they could compete with the Chiefs. But because of some of Staley's struggles with coaching and then just the defense being so bad, I think the Chiefs are going to be able to win this division fairly easily again.
I agree. You know, there's a lot of talk about the Chiefs right now with our girl Taylor Swift, but besides that, I think Mahomes and Kelsey and the rest of the offense really has been performing very well this season. And like you said, they don't play in a tough division, so I think they will come out on top. When we come back, we'll dive into the NFC, our worst of the week, and whose season might already be over. All that right here on Paige and Micah in the PM.
Now to the NFC East, where the Eagles sit at 4-0 on the season and the Cowboys at 3-1. The Cowboys' defense has been the talk of the NFL until their loss to the Cardinals, but they bounced back in a big way versus the Patriots last weekend, allowing only 3 points and scoring 14. Do you think this Cowboys team is good enough to challenge the Eagles this season, or does this division still belong to Philly?
I do think the Cowboys are going to put up a fight in this game. But, I mean, as we talked about earlier, the Eagles are doing pretty good. Jalen Hurts is currently leading the team, and just overall, they're playing some really good, solid football. We talked a little bit about the Cowboys and their win over the Patriots. I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but a very convincing win. And while I think that will translate into this next game, just the Eagles are going to come out on top. You can't argue with the strongness of their offense and the strongness of their defense, and just looking at the stats, they are a better team overall.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a series this season where we could look at maybe a split series where the Cowboys win at home and the Eagles win at home, that type of a thing, but I just think the Eagles are a better roster from top to bottom, and will be able to finish the season with a better record than the Cowboys. Because despite the Cowboys' vaunted defense, there are still some offensive questions on that team, maybe a little bit of up and down like we saw versus the Cardinals, just randomly not showing up in Glendale. So weird. Actually, it's not weird because it's the Cowboys, and we're used to seeing this from them all the time.
Yes.
So I think because of that, you got to take the Eagles over the course of a full season.
I agree with that. And now on to one of the more fun stories of the NFL season so far, the NFC North. The Lions sit atop the division at 3-1, led by Jared Goff and their high-powered offense. With news breaking this week that the Lions will be getting outstanding deep threat Jameson Williams back 4 weeks earlier than expected, do you think anyone in the North can catch Detroit right now?
No, I don't. I mean, the Bears aren't going to do it for sure.
Definitely
they are
not.
Awful. The Vikings are also not good.
No.
They're 1-3. That one score luck from last year is starting to bite them this year. And then the Packers, I believe in Jordan Love, but I think there is some development to be done for that team. And I think the Lions are just there like, okay, this is a great situation. We're just going to take the division this year. And this offense is so good. Offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, I would expect to see in a head coaching position somewhere next season. And the defense is good too. Aiden Hutchinson has been just a game wrecker for the Lions this season. You just turn on a Lions game and watching the defense, you're like, there goes Aiden Hutchinson. Oh, Aiden Hutchinson beat his blocker again. Oh, Aiden Hutchinson's about to hit the quarterback.
There he goes again.
He's just been on fire this year. And so I think because of that and then the dynamic offense, which is about to get even more dynamic with Jamison Williams, I think this Lions team is going to be very hard to keep from winning the North this year.
And now onto a division that has been better than many people expected, the NFC South. The Buccaneers sit at 3-1 in the division and lead. They are closely followed by the Falcons and Saints, who both sit at 2-2. Can Baker keep baking and lead the Bucs to a division win, or will the Falcons and Saints be able to make a run at Tampa?
I think this is one of the more interesting division races we're going to have this season. The Buccaneers have looked good, but as you say, how much do you really trust Baker Mayfield to keep it going? And I'm not sure that I do. I think the Falcons are also a contender for this division. Arthur Smith, you hear him all the time. I don't care about fantasy points. I don't care about fantasy points. Well, you better start caring about real points because your offense isn't doing anything right now. I think if the Falcons can figure out how to move the ball consistently, granted, a lot of that is a Desmond Ridder problem. He has not been good at all. But if they can figure out how to run this offense through Bijan Robinson in the run game and then open it up for Ridder because of that, I think they can be a threat to the Bucs. The Panthers, I don't think, are in this race at all this season. And then with Derek Carr being out for a few weeks with his AC joint, I don't think the Saints will be able to compete long-term either. So I think this is going to come down to the Falcons and the Bucs. And in that race right now, I would take the Bucs.
Good picks, hot takes maybe? I don't think so. And finally, let's take a look at the NFC West. The Niners hold the division lead at 4-1, but the Seahawks are 3-1 and have a favorable upcoming schedule. Is the division as straightforward as everyone thinks, or will Seattle have something to say before it's all said and done?
I think Seattle will have something to say, but I think the Niners will respond and say, you're worse than us, and win this division pretty easily. The Seahawks defense, though, is a Legion of Boom back. Devin Witherspoon with the 97-yard pick six off of Daniel Jones on Monday Night Football is impressive. This defense is playing hard right now. 11 sacks versus the Giants, which I don't care how bad your offensive line is. 11 sacks is 11 sacks.
Yeah.
That is an insane number.
Huge.
Geno Smith leading this offense. I think they will probably be a wild card team for sure this season, but I think San Fran is just too good. With that offense led by Christian McCaffrey, who also throws touchdowns sometimes, just for fun.
Just for fun.
And then the defense, which is still at the top of the NFL, I think the Niners are going to win this division.
I agree. The 49ers looking very strong this year. Possibly a Super Bowl team. We'll have to wait till the season is over to find out.
Now it's time for Worst of the Week, where we highlight a game in which a team put up a performance so embarrassing that it needs to be discussed. This week's Worst of the Week is the Chicago Bears. The Bears blew a 28-7 lead versus the Broncos to lose 31-28. Yep, the same Denver Broncos who gave up 70 the week before. That's just inexcusable, and the Bears surely must be focused on draft position and Caleb Williams. The only issue with that is Justin Fields kind of played well versus the Broncos. So if you are managing the Bears, would you give Fields more time, or do you think it's time for the Bears to look elsewhere?
I personally think that Justin Fields, his time at the Bears is just declining. I think, with both the Bears and the Broncos going into that game 0-3, and then the outcome of that game and how that worked out, I mean, that's just bad on for both teams, on both ends of the ball. It was just, I think there's a lot of team reconstruction that needs to be done. But as someone who is a Broncos fan and lives in an area full of Bears fans, I mean, this was a really painful game to watch for me. Like I said earlier, both teams are in their rebuilding era. But for the Broncos, this was a very good win for Vance Joseph and just showed that, the Broncos can win games, actually. Russell Wilson had his best game yet, throwing 21 for 28, 233 yards, and 3 touchdowns.
Chef Russ finally cooking a little bit.
Finally. Only took him a couple years. The Broncos defense shows that they still got it with that last interception to win the game. Overall, just, as my dad liked to call it, the dumpster bowl. but just showed a lot about both of these teams.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Broncos. I think that defense has been so good in previous years. I think it's more of a Vance Joseph problem than a personnel problem because you have a lot of talent on that defense, especially with Patrick Surtain and Justin Simmons in the back end. I think those are two of the best DBs in football. You look at that team and you look at the talent, you're like, why are they consistently so bad? And like I said, I think a lot of that is a Vance Joseph issue. As for the Bears, I like Justin Fields, but I think it's about to be the end of his time in Chicago. I think this could be a whole regime firing type thing this offseason, and you just try to go in, because they have the Panthers pick too, so they could be picking at 1 and 2 in the draft. And I think if you have that, you would be foolish not to take Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison and give your team a brand new start to start the next season.
I agree. So maybe this is the time in the season when the Bears start to tank. Pretty early in my opinion, but you never know. Now to close out the night, let's talk about our teams whose time has run out. This is striking midnight. Micah, who struck midnight for you this week?
For me, it's got to be the New England Patriots. Losing 38-3 to the Cowboys, it's really bad. Mac Jones, really bad. 12 for 21 for 150 and 2 interceptions, and then he got benched for Bailey Zappi. So I think you're looking at that QB room. There's not really much there. The offense, not really much there. The whole team, really, not really much there, except for some old players on the defense. So I think this could really be the complete end of even the Patriots being good. This dynasty that used to exist is about to end with a thud. And I think if this continues for multiple years, you might see Bill Belichick not get fired. I don't think they would do it to him, but just highly suggested to resign. So I think the clock has struck midnight on the Patriots season.
I agree. I do think the Patriots have just underperformed and, like you said, are not the dynasty that they used to be. Obviously, you know, that comes with when your star players leave, but, you know, when that happens, you need to rebuild. And have they really? No, at least not with Mac Jones. Crossing over paths into their division rivals, the Jets. You know, Zach Wilson shows just a small glimpse of hope, but in the end, did not turn out how he wanted it to.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who are like, show me the smallest thing, and I am ready to be hurt again. And I think the Jets fans are going to be hurt again watching him the rest of this season.
Just lots of trouble and lots of hurt up north, you know, with these teams. You know, cold teams, cold area. Not sure how this could play out for the rest of the season, but we'll just have to see. Let's talk a little bit about this Jets-Kansas City game. Micah, you want to talk to us about that?
So this game for me, you saw a pleasant surprise from Zach Wilson. He had one drive where I think it was like 5 for 5 for 75 yards and then ran it in for himself. So I think that was very encouraging. Like I said, I am so ready to be hurt again by Zach Wilson. I loved him out of college, and I really hope he develops, but I'm going to need to see more than just one game. As for the refs in this game, a lot of holding non-calls on the Chiefs' offensive line, especially there was one on a big third down late in the game. And then to go call defensive holding on Sauce Gardner on a play that Patrick Mahomes was intercepted and could have set up a game-winning drive for the Jets. You hate to see the refs steal the spotlight from Taylor Swift like that, honestly. So I think it's a shame that a game that good is going to be in question because of some questionable officiating, but overall it was a great primetime game.
I agree. A fun one to watch. Tough one, but a fun one.
And with that, our night is ended. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week for more excitement, action, and most importantly, football. For tonight, I'm Micah Farmer.
And I'm Paige Hunter. And this has been Paige and Micah in the PM.